July 28, 1944. The sun had barely climbed above the ragged line of coconut palms when the P-38 lightnings roared into the waking sky over the Pacific. You could feel the engines rumble in your chest like distant thunder. Smell the hot castor oil and burning avgas, hear the hot, pitched whine of turbochargers pushing air into thirsty Allison engines. And on that morning, something was different. The slender twin-thread boom fighters didn't just scream into the heat haze. They seemed to float, reluctant to burn. Precious fuel, climbing faster, lasting longer, reaching further than just hours before had seemed possible. Pilots exchanged tense, hopeful glances over the radio, wondering if this flight might be the one that changed everything. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning was already a legend. Its sleek fuselage and twin tails made it unmistakable, like a bolt of polished chrome frozen midden stripe. And those who had never seen one in action spoke in hushed, respectful tones about its power. Designed in the late 1930s for a demanding Army Air Corps specification, the P-38 went on to serve throughout the war in every theater, a testament to American industrial might and aeronautical daring. Its unique configuration paired two powerful Allison engines with a central nacelle housing lethal forward armament, a 20-limb cannon and four 50i caliber machine guns. Concentrated fire that could shred enemy fighters and bomber defenses alike. But by 1944, despite its raw capability, the Lightning faced a persistent challenge: range. Across the vast blue expanses of the Pacific, missions could stretch beyond what standard tactics and factory settings would allow. Every extra mile of endurance meant deeper strikes, safer returns, and a tactical advantage that could tilt the balance in brutal Allen campaigns. P-38 pilots knew this on a visceral level. Your life could hinge on whether your fuel gauge dipped too low over enemy waters. Some missions demanded carefully calculated fuel management that felt more like prayer than engineering. Enter a figure whose life had already been defined by long flights over ocean and sky: Charles Lindbergh. By 1944, his name was already etched into aviation lore for that solitary transatlantic crossing in 1927 that captivated the world, a feat of endurance and precision that seemed to embody the very soul of powered flight. But World War II had been complicated for Lindbergh. Though initially sidelined due to political controversy, he had quietly found a role in the Pacific, not as a combat pilot, but as a civilian consultant for the U.S. Army Air Forces. He brought with him decades of experience in endurance flying and engine efficiency, knowledge that, in the hands of battle-hardened pilots, could become deadly. Lindbergh's role was subtle, almost invisible. He wasn't flying in combat formations, dodging flak or Japanese fighters. Instead, he walked among mechanics and engineers, opened maintenance logs, calculated fuel flow rates, and tested engine tweaks with meticulous care. Pilots called him the whisper in the engine, the man who could coax extra miles out of a Lightning without risking its life. Some adjustments were as simple as modifying throttle settings for maximum cruise efficiency. Others involved precise calculations on mixture ratios at high altitudes, tiny, almost invisible details that could extend a P-38 feet's operational range by hundreds of miles. Suspense hung in the air as Lindbergh worked quietly. Could one man's interventions really tilt the scales against seasoned enemy pilots? Was it possible for a civilian, however famous, to make a frontline fighter nearly untouchable in the hands of trained combat crews? In the Pacific, where every minute could be the difference between life and death, these questions were not idle. By mid-all morning, the P-38 seconds began their first test flights under Lindbergh's guidance. Pilots reported astonishing performance. Engines ran smoother, climb rate improved, and fuel lasted far longer than predicted. The impossible trick, a combination of engine tuning, precise throttle management, and pilot instruction, was no magic. It was science, honed by years of experience and fearless experimentation. And yet, to those watching from the tarmac, it felt like magic. Enemy fighters that once struck with terrifying efficiency now found themselves chasing shadows, unable to catch aircraft that seemed to move faster, climb higher, and outlast them at every turn. Rumors began to spread through the squadrons. The planes feel different, a young pilot radioed back to base. It's like they're alive. Mechanics nodded knowingly. They had seen the tweaks, tested the new procedures, and recognized the genius in what Lindbergh had quietly implemented. Across the Pacific theater, the Lightning began to earn a reputation not only as a deadly interceptor and strike fighter, but as an aircraft almost untouchable when flown with precision. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the airstrips and coral reefs, the first missions ended. With a rare sight, P-38 seconds returning with extra fuel in the tanks and minimal wear on engines. Victory, for once, was measured not just in destroyed enemy planes, but in lives saved. in the silent triumph of engineering over chance. That evening, pilots would gather, retell stories of the day's flights, and wonder who could have imagined that a civilian, operating far from the front lines, could make such a difference. Little did they know that this was only the beginning. The techniques Lindbergh had quietly perfected would ripple through every squadron, changing strategies, empowering pilots, and tipping the scales in the deadliest battles of the Pacific. And yet, in the chaos of war, such stories often went unrecorded in official dispatches. They survived in the hushed conversations of mechanics, the awe of returning pilots, and the meticulous notes of a man who had devoted his life to flight. And so, in the blistering heat of that Pacific morning, amid the roar of engines and the smell of burning fuel, the P-38 Lightning became more than a fighter. It became a legend, a symbol of how ingenuity, precision, and courage could transform ordinary machines into nearly untouchable instruments of war. August 3, 1944. A humid breeze rolled across the Coral airstrip as the first P-38s prepared for a deep strike mission over enemy-held islands. Engines idled with a low growl, exhaust smoke curling in the tropical heat, and pilots adjusted goggles, gloves, and oxygen masks, silently counting their fingers, double-checking gauges. The Pacific stretched before them like a glittering, treacherous mirror. For these men, every mile meant risk, anti-aircraft guns, enemy fighters, treacherous weather, and the ever-present specter of running out of fuel far from home. But something had changed. These planes, tuned in ways few fully understood, promised endurance, speed, and a chance of survival that was previously unimaginable. The secret lay in the invisible hand of Charles Lindbergh. While he was officially a civilian advisor, his presence was felt in every cockpit. He had spent hours with each squadron, not only adjusting engine parameters but coaching pilots on efficient flight techniques, tiny changes to propeller pitch, throttle management, and leaning the mixture at specific altitudes could extend fuel by 15 to 20%. A staggering margin over hundreds of miles of open ocean. To the average pilot, these adjustments might have seemed negligible, but in the tense calculus of life and death, they were revolutionary. On this day, Lieutenant Richard Dick Bong, America's top ace in the Pacific, climbed into his Lightning. He had flown dozens of combat missions, witnessed fellow pilots shot down, and known the bitter taste of survival mixed with loss. Now, with Lindbergh's modifications, Bong felt something he hadn't before, a quiet confidence. "It's like the plane knows where to go," he whispered over the radio, testing maneuvers at mid-altitude. His engine hummed with unusual smoothness. Throttle adjustments felt intuitive, almost forgiving. Meanwhile, back at the maintenance base, mechanics worked feverishly to replicate Lindbergh's procedures across the fleet. Fuel lines were checked, carburetor calibrated, turbochargers monitored under strain. Each adjustment was painstaking, but the results spoke for themselves. Test flights showed improved climb rates, smoother handling, and crucially, extended range. By the time the sun hung high above the horizon, the P-38s were ready for their most daring sorties yet. Over enemy territory, the first encounters with Japanese Zero fighters illustrated the effect immediately. Once feared for their agility and relentless pursuit, found themselves unable to close the distance. The Lightning's new efficiency allowed pilots to climb faster, sustain speed longer, and execute evasive maneuvers with fewer compromises. Many enemy pilots later described the sensation of chasing these aircraft as like trying to catch lightning in a bottle. Meanwhile, bomber escort missions that previously teetered on the edge of disaster now had margin for error. Planes could linger over targets longer, provide better cover, and retreat safely with fuel to spare. The impact was not limited to a single engagement. Lindbergh's interventions had a multiplying effect across the theater. Pilots reported being able to perform extended patrols, unexpected intercept, and more aggressive dives without fear of running out of fuel. This created a psychological advantage. American pilots flew with renewed confidence, knowing that their aircraft could sustain maneuvers their enemies could not. Stories began to circulate, whispered among crews, of planes that seemed to vanish in pursuit, evade impossible attacks, and return unscathed. But Lindbergh's genius was subtle. He never claimed glory. It wasn't in the records of medal ceremonies or hero roles. He taught pilots to respect the plane, the engine, and their own judgment. Every adjustment is a conversation with the aircraft, he told them quietly. If you listen, it will tell you how far it can go. These were lessons learned not in classrooms, but over countless hours of trial and error, balancing engineering precision with practical combat realities. Even minor changes could be dramatic in the air. A few degrees of propeller pitch, a slight tweak in manifold pressure. These seemingly trivial adjustments could prevent engine overheating, reduce stress on turbochargers, and maintain maximum performance throughout a mission. Pilots soon realized that their confidence was mirrored in the aircraft's behavior. Plane responded smoothly, engines purred instead of groaned, and fuel consumption dropped. The difference between returning safely and ditching at sea became measurable. Sometimes the difference between life and death. One striking example occurred during a late August raid on a heavily fortified Japanese supply island. A squadron of P-38s, tuned by Lindbergh's recommendations, faced unexpected anti-aircraft fire and interception by multiple enemy fighters. Pilots performed split-second decisions, climbing, diving, turning sharply, and weaving through flak with uncharacteristic grace. Fuel gauges, which in prior missions would have forced early retreat, showed comfortable reserves. By the end of the sortie, every Lightning returned, engines in perfect condition. The mission's success was immediately attributed to tactical planning, but behind the scenes, it was the civilians' invisible touch that had turned the odds. Rumors of the untouchable P-38 spread through the Pacific theater, elevating morale while sowing frustration among enemy forces. Japanese pilots reportedly began to fear the Lightnings not just for their firepower but for their endurance and elusive capabilities. The combination of engineering ingenuity and precise technique had created a plane that was faster, more efficient, and more survivable than anyone had expected. Pilots described it as a plane that fought with them, not against them. And yet, as remarkable as the technical improvements were, the human element remained central. The knowledge Lindbergh imparted had to be internalized by each pilot, instinctively, applied in split-second maneuvers, under blinding sun or torrential rain. Combat success was never guaranteed, but with every mission, confidence grew. Flight logs began to reflect extended ranges, fewer mechanical issues, and higher mission success rates. Each of these small victories compounded into a strategic advantage. Plane 38 seconds could strike farther, survive longer, and return reliably. By the end of August 1944, the cumulative effect of Lindbergh's adjustments was undeniable. Civilian innovation had altered the course of aerial warfare in the Pacific. The P-38, already a formidable fighter, had become a nearly untouchable weapon in the hands of skilled pilots who understood the plane's secrets. Enemy forces struggled to adapt. American pilots gained a psychological edge that would carry them through increasingly perilous missions. In these weeks, the P-38s demonstrated more than raw power. They embodied human ingenuity, courage, and the subtle interplay between man and machine. One man's meticulous study of engines, fuel, and aerodynamics had transformed ordinary fighters into extraordinary tools of war, a reminder that even amidst chaos, knowledge and precision could make all the difference. September 12, 1944. Dawn broke over the Mariana Islands, painting the ocean in molten gold. The air smelled of salt, oil, and ozone from nearby engines warming on the tarmac. Pilots moved with quiet purpose, pre-flighting their P-38 Lightnings, checking gauges, testing flaps, listening to the engine's deep hum reverberate through the fuselage. Today was no ordinary mission. Intelligence had reported a heavily defended enemy convoy moving through the Pacific, a high-risk target that could cripple American operations if not stopped. Every pilot knew the stakes. This mission would test not only skill and courage but the subtle innovations that had transformed these planes from formidable to nearly untouchable. As the Lightnings climbed into the thin morning air, the sun glinting off polished metal, the first challenge presented itself. Enemy fighters emerged from cloud cover with lethal precision, swarming to intercept. Pilots gripped control sticks, adrenaline spiking. Yet something was different. The P-38s responded with uncanny agility. Engines tuned by Charles Lindbergh's civilian modifications hummed perfectly under strain. Fuel-efficient climbs allowed pilots to maneuver higher than usual, evade attacks, and maintain formation integrity even under heavy fire. One pilot later recalled, "It was like the plane anticipated danger. We could push it harder than ever before, and it didn't complain." The first dogfight erupted over the convoy, dove and twisted, trying to outmaneuver the twin-boom Lightnings. The P-38s climbed faster, accelerated quicker, and executed turns with a stability the enemy could not match. Pilots applied Lindbergh's precise techniques, modulating throttle and mixture at the right altitudes to conserve fuel while maintaining lethal speed. Each maneuver felt instinctive, yet every choice was calculated. Enemy fighters found themselves trailing a ghost, planes that seemed impossible to catch. Meanwhile, bomber escorts observed the effects firsthand. P-38s could linger over targets, providing extended protection for bombers, all while sustaining fuel levels that previously would have forced an early return. Anti-aircraft fire from the convoy proved deadly, yet the Lightning's refined handling allowed pilots to weave and dive with minimal damage. By mid-morning, reports confirmed a nearly complete success. The convoy suffered devastating losses, and every P-38 returned home with fuel to spare. The significance of these missions went beyond tactical victory. American pilots felt a surge of confidence, a sense that human ingenuity had tipped the balance in their favor. Mechanics quietly celebrated the success of the adjustments, knowing the invisible hand of Lindbergh's calculations had played a decisive role. The planes themselves had become psychological weapons, untouchable, resilient, and reliable. Enemy forces began to notice. Reports from Japanese units described lightnings that vanished and reappeared at will, fueling fear and uncertainty. Even in moments of calm, the lessons endured. Pilots practiced engine management on every sortie, fine-tuning throttle and mixture, learning to listen to their aircraft. They realized that survival was not merely a product of courage, but of understanding the machine and respecting its limits. Lindbergh's influence had transformed the culture of flight. The idea that victory could be engineered, one precise adjustment at a time. The climax of these missions came during a late September interception over enemy supply lines. A squadron of 38 seconds, fully optimized and flown with skill and precision, faced the largest Japanese response seen in months. Fighters on every vector, flak raining from anti-aircraft guns, and dangerous weather moving in rapidly. Pilots executed split-second evasive maneuvers, climbing, diving, and banking in perfect harmony with their machines. Engines held firm. Fuel remained sufficient. By the end of the engagement, the Lightnings had destroyed key enemy targets, returned unscathed, and set a new standard for operational excellence. Reflecting on these events, it becomes clear that the story of the P-38 seconds is not only a tale of speed, firepower, or advanced aerodynamics. It is a testament to the intersection of human intellect and courage with the mechanical marvels of flight. One civilian, a man who walked among engineers and pilots, who meticulously calculated adjustments and coached airmen in subtle techniques, changed the very nature of aerial combat. His work turned ordinary fighters into machines that could dominate enemy skies, extend operational range, and save lives in ways that traditional tactics alone could never achieve. In the quiet aftermath, pilots and mechanics alike would recall the invisible influence behind their successes. The P-38 had become more than a weapon. It had become a symbol of ingenuity, precision, and the quiet power of human thought applied to survival. Even decades later, the story resonates. How careful observation, relentless experimentation, and the courage to apply knowledge can make the impossible real. As the Pacific sun set, painting the horizon in deep crimson, the Lightnings returned to their airstrips. Pilots disembarked, weary but triumphant. Mechanics checked engines, and Lindbergh's subtle hand receded into memory. The war continued, brutal and relentless, but a quiet truth endured. Innovation, even from a civilian, could turn the tide, make machines untouchable, and remind the world that human ingenuity remains one of the most potent weapons of all. And for those who witnessed it firsthand, the lesson was clear. In the chaos of war, every detail counts. Every adjustment, every calculation, every careful decision could mean the difference between life and death, victory and defeat. And somewhere, above the Pacific, the P-38 Lightnings continued to soar, living proof that genius, courage, and precision could create a legacy that even the fiercest enemy could not touch.